The cabin shouldn't have had smoke coming from the chimney. Jacob Cole saw it from a quarter-mile off. A thin gray line rising straight into the evening sky, cutting through the orange light like a scar. He reined his horse to a stop and studied it, the way a man studies something that doesn't belong. He'd passed this cabin 3 times in the last 2 years. Every time it had been empty, abandoned. The kind of place people left behind when the land took more than it gave. But now someone was inside. Jacob shifted in the saddle, the leather creaking beneath him. His rifle rested across his lap, and his hand moved to it without thinking. Not drawing it, just touching it. A habit born from too many years of not knowing what waited around the next bend. He was a drifter. Had been for the better part of a decade. No home, no family, no ties to anything or anyone. Just the horse beneath him, the gun in his hands, and the road that never seemed to end. Most men would have ridden past the cabin, minded their business, kept moving. But Jacob had learned long ago that smoke in the wilderness meant one of two things: someone who needed help or someone who meant harm. Either way, it was worth knowing which. He clicked his tongue, and the horse moved forward, slow and steady, hooves crunching over the dry earth. The sun was sinking fast now, pulling shadows long across the valley. In another hour, it would be full dark. The cabin sat alone at the base of a low hill, surrounded by scrub brush and scattered rocks. It was small, one room, maybe two, with a sagging roof and walls that had weathered gray. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, and the single window was dark, but the smoke kept rising. Jacob dismounted 20 feet from the door and tied his horse to a dead tree. He pulled the rifle from the saddle scabbard and checked the load. 6 rounds, more than enough for whatever this was. He approached the cabin slowly, boots barely making a sound. The wind had died, and the silence pressed in around him, thick and watchful. "Hello, the cabin," he called out, his voice low but clear. No answer. Jacob stopped a few feet from the door, listening. He could hear the faint crackle of a fire inside, and beneath it, something else. Breathing, small, uneven, frightened. He pushed the door open with the barrel of his rifle. The interior was dim, lit only by the fading daylight and the weak glow of a fire in the stone hearth. The room smelled of smoke and dust and something sour. Spoiled food, maybe, or unwashed clothing. And then he saw her, a girl no more than 7 or 8 years old, sitting on the floor near the fire with her knees pulled up to her chest. Her dress was too big for her, patched and faded, and her hair hung in tangled dark braids. Her face was streaked with dirt, and her eyes, wide and unblinking, stared at him like he was a ghost. Jacob lowered the rifle slightly. "You alone?" The girl didn't answer, just stared. He stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him. The cabin was sparse: a broken table, a single chair, a pile of blankets in the corner. No food that he could see, no water. Nothing that said anyone had been taking care of this child. "Where's your folks?" Jacob asked, his voice softer now. The girl's lip trembled, and for a moment he thought she might cry. But she didn't. She just looked at him with those big, hollow eyes and whispered, "My papa never came back." Jacob felt something cold settle in his chest. He glanced around the room again, slower this time. There were signs now that he hadn't noticed before. A man's coat hanging on a peg by the door, covered in dust. A pair of boots near the hearth, worn thin at the soles. A belt coiled on the floor like a dead snake. "How long?" Jacob asked. The girl shook her head. "I don't know. Long time." Jacob set the rifle against the wall and crouched down, bringing himself to her level. "What's your name?" "Lily." "Lily," he repeated, nodding slowly. "I'm Jacob. You hungry?" She nodded, quick and desperate. Jacob stood and moved to the saddlebags he'd brought in with him. He pulled out a strip of dried meat and a tin canteen, then handed them to her. She took them with trembling hands and ate like she hadn't seen food in days. She probably hadn't. Jacob walked to the hearth and stirred the fire, adding a piece of wood from the small pile beside it. The flames jumped higher, pushing back the shadows. "Your papa," he said, not looking at her. "Where'd he go?" "Town," Lily said between bites. He said he'd be back before dark. That was... She stopped, her face scrunching up as she tried to remember. A long time ago. Jacob's jaw tightened. A long time for a child could mean anything. Days, weeks, maybe more. You been here by yourself the whole time? Yes, sir. Anyone else know you're here? Neighbors? Family? She shook her head. Jacob exhaled slowly and looked around the cabin again. This wasn't good. A man doesn't leave his child alone for weeks without a reason. Either he was dead or he wasn't coming back. You know where your papa went? What he was doing in town? Lily hesitated, then nodded. He said he had to sell something. Said we'd have money after. Said we'd eat good. Jacob's stomach turned. He'd seen this before. Desperate men making desperate deals. Sometimes they came back. Most times they didn't. What's your papa's name? William Carver. Jacob didn't recognize it, but that didn't mean much. The West was full of men no one knew. He walked to the window and looked out at the darkening valley. The sun was almost gone now, just a thin line of red on the horizon. He could leave, ride into town, ask around, maybe find out what happened to William Carver. But that would mean leaving the girl alone again. And something in him, something he thought he'd buried a long time ago, wouldn't let him do that. Jacob turned back to Lily. She was still eating, slower now, savoring each bite. Her face was gaunt, her cheeks hollow. She looked like a ghost already. All right, he said quietly. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay here tonight by the fire. I'm going to sleep by the door. And in the morning, we're going to go find your papa. Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide with something that might have been hope. You promise? Jacob picked up his rifle and lantern, checking the oil. I promise. He didn't know if it was a promise he could keep, but he was going to try. Jacob woke to the sound of whimpering. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cabin was cold and dark. He sat up slowly, his hand moving to the rifle beside him, and listened. Lily was curled up in the corner, wrapped in the old blankets, crying softly into her knees. Jacob set the rifle down and stood, his joints stiff from sleeping on the hard floor. He moved to the hearth and stirred the coals, adding kindling until the flames caught again. The light pushed back the darkness, and the warmth began to spread. He glanced at Lily. She was awake, watching him, her face wet with tears. Bad dream? He asked. She nodded. Jacob didn't press. He'd had enough bad dreams himself to know they didn't need explaining. He poured water from his canteen into a dented pot and set it over the fire to boil. Then he dug through his saddlebags and found the last of his coffee and a small sack of cornmeal. You ever had coffee? He asked. Lily shook her head. Well, you're about to. He made a weak brew and mixed the cornmeal with water, shaping it into small cakes that he cooked over the fire. It wasn't much, but it was hot, and it was food. They ate in silence, sitting across from each other, the fire crackling between them. When she finished, Lily wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked at him. Why are you helping me? Jacob paused, the tin cup halfway to his lips. Because you need help. But you don't know me. No, he agreed. I don't. Then why? Jacob set the cup down and leaned back against the wall. You ever hear the story about the Good Samaritan? Lily shook her head. It's about a man who helped a stranger when no one else would. Jacob looked into the fire. I ain't much for stories or religion, but I figure if you got the chance to help someone and you don't, well, that says something about you. Lily thought about that for a moment. My papa used to say that too. He said good men don't walk past people in trouble. Sounds like a smart man. He was. Her voice cracked. Is. Jacob looked at her. Really looked at her. She was trying so hard to be brave, to hold herself together, but she was just a child, and she'd been alone too long. We'll find him, Jacob said, one way or another. Lily nodded, but her eyes said she didn't quite believe him. They left at first light. Jacob saddled his horse and lifted Lily up in front of him. She was light as a bird, all bones and worn fabric. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders and clicked the horse into motion. The ride to town took most of the morning. The landscape was dry and endless, dotted with scrub and stone. and the sun climbed hot and merciless into the sky. Lily didn't talk much. She just sat quietly, her small hands gripping the saddle horn. Jacob's mind turned over the possibilities. William Carver had gone to town to sell something. Money had been involved, and he hadn't come back. That could mean a lot of things, and none of them were good. The town of Red Bluff appeared on the horizon just before noon, a scattering of weathered buildings along a single dusty street. It wasn't much, but it had a general store, a saloon, and a sheriff's office. Jacob rode straight to the sheriff's office and dismounted, lifting Lily down after him. The sheriff was a graying man with a belly that hung over his belt and eyes that had seen too much. He looked up from his desk when Jacob walked in, then glanced at the girl. "Help you?" the sheriff asked. "I'm looking for a man named William Carver," Jacob said. "He came through here a few weeks back, maybe longer." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "And who's asking?" "A friend." "That his girl?" Jacob nodded. The sheriff sighed and rubbed his face. "Yeah, I know Carver. He came through about 3 weeks ago. Said he had a claimed deed he was trying to sell." Jacob felt his stomach drop. "Did he sell it?" "He tried. Took it to a man named Garrett. Land buyer. Runs an office out of the saloon. They had words, loud ones." "What kind of words?" "The kind that end with a man getting thrown out on his ass." The sheriff stood and crossed to the window. "Carver left that night. Headed east, far as I know." "Alone?" The sheriff hesitated, and that was all Jacob needed to know. "Who went with him?" Jacob asked, his voice flat. "Garrett's boys. 2 of them." The sheriff turned, his face hard. "Look, I don't know what happened after they left town, but Carver was a desperate man, and desperate men make bad deals." Jacob's hand curled into a fist. "Where's Garrett now?" "In the saloon, where he always is." Jacob turned toward the door. "Mister," the sheriff called after him, "you go over there stirring up trouble. You're going to find more than you're looking for." Jacob stopped at the door and looked back. "I'll take my chances." He stepped outside, Lily following close behind. "Stay here," Jacob told her, crouching down. "I need you to wait by the horse. Can you do that?" Lily's eyes were wide with fear. "Are you coming back?" "Yes." "Promise?" Jacob looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I promise." He stood, picked up his rifle, and walked toward the saloon. The saloon was dim and smelled of whiskey and sweat. A handful of men sat at tables, nursing drinks, and a bartender wiped down glasses behind the counter. At a corner table sat a man in a fine coat and hat. Too fine for a town like this. His face was fleshed and smug, and 2 men flanked him like dogs waiting for scraps. Garrett. Jacob walked straight to the table and stopped, his rifle held loose at his side. Garrett looked up, eyebrows raised. "Can I help you, friend?" "William Carver," Jacob said. "Where is he?" Garrett smiled, slow and cold. "Don't know the name?" "Yes, you do." The 2 men beside Garrett shifted, hands drifting toward their guns. Jacob didn't move. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Where is he?" Garrett leaned back in his chair, still smiling. "Even if I did know, what makes you think I'd tell you?" Jacob raised the rifle and pointed it at Garrett's chest. The saloon went silent. "Because if you don't," Jacob said quietly, "I'm going to put a hole in you big enough to see daylight through." Garrett's smile faded. Section 2. Word count, 131 words. No one moved. The air in the saloon hung thick and tense, like the moment before lightning strikes. Garrett stared down the barrel of Jacob's rifle, his face pale beneath the smugness, and the 2 men beside him had frozen mid-reach, their hands hovering near their holsters. Jacob's finger rested lightly on the trigger. His expression was calm, almost bored, but his eyes were cold as creek water in winter. "You really want to do this?" Garrett asked, his voice strained. "I really want to know where William Carver is," Jacob said. "Everything else depends on your answer." Garrett licked his lips. "Look, friend, I don't know what you've heard. I heard you bought a claim deed off a desperate man. I heard your boys rode out with him after, and I heard he never came back." Jacob's voice didn't rise, but it cut like a blade. So I'm thinking you know exactly where he is. One of Garrett's men, a wiry, hard-faced man with a scar across his cheek, spoke up. You're making a big mistake, Drifter. Jacob didn't even look at him. Then I've made bigger. The bartender cleared his throat. Gentlemen, I don't want no trouble in here. Then stay out of it, Jacob said. Garrett raised his hand slowly, palms out. All right, all right. Let's everybody just calm down. He glanced at his men, then back at Jacob. Carver and I had a business transaction. That's all. What kind of transaction? He had a land deed, said it was worth something. I made him an offer. And, Garrett hesitated, he didn't like the offer. So you sent your boys after him. I sent them to renegotiate. Jacob's jaw tightened. Where is he now? I don't know. Jacob cocked the rifle. I swear, Garrett said quickly, sweat beading on his forehead. My boys came back without him. Said he took off into the hills. They lost him in the dark. And the deed? Garrett's eyes flicked to the side, just for a second. That was answer enough. Jacob lowered the rifle slightly and stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You took the deed, and you left him out there to die. I didn't. Where? East of here, near the old Clayton mine. That's all I know. I swear to God. Jacob stared at him for a long moment, weighing the truth of it. Then he stepped back and lowered the rifle. If you're lying, Jacob said, I'll be back. And next time, I won't ask twice. He turned and walked toward the door. Behind him, he heard Garrett exhale and mutter, Get him! Jacob spun, raising the rifle again just as the scarred man drew his gun. The shot cracked through the saloon like thunder. The scarred man staggered back, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. His gun clattered to the floor. Jacob worked the lever, chambering another round, and aimed at the second man, who had his gun halfway out. Don't, Jacob said. The man froze, then slowly raised his hands. Jacob backed toward the door, his rifle trained on Garrett and his men. Next time you send someone after me, make sure they're faster. He stepped outside into the blinding sunlight. Lily was waiting by the horse, her face pale and frightened. I heard a shot. I'm fine, Jacob said, holstering the rifle and swinging into the saddle. He pulled her up in front of him. We gotta move, now. Did you find out about my papa? Maybe. Hold on. He kicked the horse into a gallop, and they tore out of town, dust rising in a cloud behind them. They rode east for hours, following the faint trail that led into the hills. The sun climbed high, and then began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Jacob kept glancing back over his shoulder, watching for riders. Garrett's men would come. Maybe not today, but soon. Men like that didn't let things go. Lily sat quietly in front of him, her small body tense. Is my papa dead? Jacob didn't answer right away. I don't know, but you think he is. He looked down at her. She was staring straight ahead, her face set in a way that was far too old for a child. I think your papa got himself into something bad, Jacob said carefully, but that don't mean he's dead. It just means we gotta find him before it's too late. And if we don't, Jacob tightened his grip on the reins, then we'll deal with that when it comes. They found the Clayton mine just before dusk. It was an old shaft dug into the side of a hill, abandoned years ago when the silver ran out. The entrance was half collapsed, timbers rotting and boards hanging loose. The air around it smelled of damp earth and decay. Jacob dismounted and helped Lily down. Stay close to me. She nodded. He lit his lantern and held it high, the flame casting flickering shadows across the mine entrance. Carver, he called out. William Carver. His voice echoed into the darkness. No answer. Jacob stepped forward, ducking under the broken timbers, and entered the mine. The lantern light pushed back the shadows, revealing a narrow tunnel that sloped downward into the earth. Papa, Lily called out, her voice breaking. Papa, are you here? Still nothing. They moved deeper, Jacob in front with the lantern, Lily clinging to his coat. The air grew colder, and the silence pressed in around them like a living thing. And then they saw him. William Carver was slumped against the tunnel wall, his clothes torn and bloodied, his face bruised and swollen. His eyes were closed, and for a terrible moment, Jacob thought they were too late. But then Carver's chest rose, just barely. He was alive. Papa! Lily broke away from Jacob and ran to her father, falling to her knees beside him. Papa, wake up! Carver's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed. Lily? I'm here, Papa. I'm here. Jacob crouched beside them, setting the lantern down. Carver was in bad shape, beaten, dehydrated, and likely with broken ribs, but he was breathing. Can you stand? Jacob asked. Carver tried to nod, then groaned in pain. Who are you? Someone who made your daughter a promise, Jacob said. Now let's get you out of here. He slipped an arm under Carver's shoulder and lifted, hauling the man to his feet. Carver leaned heavily against him, barely able to walk. Together they made their way back up the tunnel, Lily leading the way with the lantern. But when they reached the entrance, Jacob stopped. 3 horses stood outside, silhouetted against the fading light, and 3 men stood beside them. Garrett's men had found them. Section 3. Word count 144 words. Jacob eased William Carver back against the tunnel wall and stepped in front of Lily, his hand moving to his rifle. The 3 men outside didn't draw their guns. Not yet. They just stood there, watching, their faces hidden in shadow. The one in the middle, tall, broad-shouldered, with a flat-brimmed hat, spoke first. That's far enough, Drifter. Jacob didn't move. You following us? Mr. Garrett don't like being threatened, especially not in front of his men. The man tilted his head. He wants that deed back, and he wants you gone. Deed's not here, Jacob said, and I'm not leaving without these 2. The man laughed, cold and humorless. You shot one of ours. That ain't something we forget. He drew first. Don't matter. The man took a step forward. Here's how this goes. You hand over Carver, walk away, and maybe we let the girl go too. Or you make this difficult, and we leave all 3 of you in that mine. Jacob's grip tightened on the rifle. Behind him he could hear Lily's quiet, frightened breathing and the ragged sound of her father struggling to stay conscious. 3 against 1. Bad odds. Worse if he had to protect the girl and a barely conscious man. What's it gonna be? The man asked. Jacob glanced back at Lily. She was staring up at him, her eyes wide and filled with the kind of trust he didn't deserve. My papa never came back, she'd said, but Jacob had, and he'd made a promise. All right, Jacob said slowly, lowering the rifle. You win, the man smiled. Smart choice. Jacob turned to Lily and crouched down, his voice barely a whisper. When I move, you run. You take your papa and you go back into the tunnel, deep as you can. Don't stop. Don't look back. Understand? But understand! Lily's lip trembled, but she nodded. Jacob stood and faced the men again. Let me get him on his feet first. The man waved a hand. Go ahead. Jacob moved back to Carver and hauled him upright, slipping the man's arm over his shoulder. Carver groaned, barely able to stand. And then, in one smooth motion, Jacob shoved Carver back into Lily's arms, spun, and raised the rifle. He fired. The first shot took the man in the middle square in the chest. He dropped without a sound. The other 2 scrambled for their guns, but Jacob was faster. He worked the lever, fired again. One man staggered sideways, clutching his leg, and then dove behind the mine entrance as bullets tore through the air where he'd been standing. Run! Jacob shouted. Lily grabbed her father and pulled him deeper into the tunnel, the lantern swinging wildly in her hand. Jacob pressed himself against the tunnel wall, breathing hard, his heart pounding. He could hear the men outside, cursing, reloading, regrouping. 2 left. Maybe one still able to fight. Not great, but better. He leaned out and fired blindly, forcing them to take cover, then ducked back as return fire chipped stone from the tunnel entrance. You're dead, Drifter, one of them shouted. You hear me? Dead! Jacob didn't answer. He was counting rounds. 3 left in the rifle. His revolver had 6, but it wouldn't be much use at this distance. He needed to get outside. End this. He took a breath, then bolted from the tunnel, firing as he ran. One of the men went down. The other, wounded but still standing, raised his gun. Jacob threw himself to the side, rolled, and came up firing. The man staggered back, his gun falling from his hand, and collapsed into the dirt. Silence. Jacob lay on his back, chest heaving, staring up at the darkening sky. His ears rang, and his shoulder ached where he'd hit the ground. But he was alive. After a moment, he sat up and looked around. 3 bodies, 3 horses, and no sign of anyone else. "Lily!" he called out, his voice hoarse. "It's over! You can come out!" For a long moment, there was nothing. Then slowly the lantern appeared at the tunnel entrance, and Lily emerged, helping her father stumble forward. Jacob got to his feet and moved to them, taking Carver's weight again. "You all right?" Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face. You killed them." "I didn't have a choice," Jacob said quietly. "They weren't going to let us walk away." Lily looked at the bodies, then back at Jacob. "Thank you." Jacob didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They made camp a few miles from the mine, in a shallow ravine where the wind couldn't reach them. Jacob built a small fire and tended to Carver's injuries as best he could, cleaning wounds, wrapping ribs, giving him water. Carver was weak, but conscious now. He looked at Jacob with hollow eyes. "You saved us." "Your daughter saved you," Jacob said. "She's the one who didn't give up." Carver glanced at Lily, who was sitting nearby, wrapped in Jacob's coat. "She's stronger than me." "Maybe," Jacob said. "But you stayed alive long enough for someone to find you. That takes strength too." Carver closed his eyes. "I made a mistake. I thought I could sell that deed, get us out of that cabin, give her a better life. But I got greedy. And Garrett, he took everything." "Deed's gone," Jacob said. "But you're not. That's what matters." Carver nodded, but the guilt on his face didn't fade. Later, when Carver had fallen asleep, Lily moved closer to the fire and sat beside Jacob. "Are you going to leave us?" she asked quietly. Jacob stared into the flames. "You got your papa back. You don't need me anymore. But what if he can't take care of me?" Jacob looked at her. "He will. He just needs time. And you, what do you need?" Jacob didn't answer. He didn't know how. Lily leaned against his shoulder, small and warm. "I think you need someone too." Jacob's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he was fine alone, that he'd always been fine alone, but he couldn't, because somewhere along the way, between the cabin and the mine, between the promise and the gunfight, something had changed. He'd stopped running, and for the first time in 10 years, he didn't want to start again. Section 4. Word count 1,074 words. They rode into Red Bluff 3 days later. William Carver sat behind Jacob on the horse, still weak but healing. Lily rode in front, wrapped in Jacob's coat, her small hands gripping the saddle horn. The town hadn't changed. Same dusty street, same weathered buildings. But this time, Jacob didn't ride for the saloon. He rode straight to the sheriff's office. The sheriff looked up when they walked in, his eyes widening slightly when he saw Carver. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought you were dead, Carver." "Almost was," Carver rasped. Jacob stepped forward. "Garrett and his men tried to kill him, left him for dead in the old Clayton mine." The sheriff's expression darkened. "And where are Garrett's men now?" "Dead." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, studying Jacob. "All of them?" "All of them." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the sheriff sighed and rubbed his face. "Garrett's been a problem for a long time. Folks around here were too scared to stand up to him." He looked at Jacob. "You just made a lot of people's lives easier." "I didn't do it for them." "I know." The sheriff stood and moved to a cabinet, pulling out a worn leather satchel. He opened it, revealing a folded piece of paper, the deed Garrett had stolen from Carver. "Found this in Garrett's office after you left," the sheriff said, handing it to Carver. "Figured if you were still alive, you'd want it back." Carver took the deed with trembling hands, staring at it like it was something holy. I thought it was gone." "It ain't worth much," the sheriff said. "Land's dry, soil's poor, but it's yours." Carver looked at Lily, then at Jacob. "It's something. It's a start." Jacob nodded. "Then that's all you need." They stayed in town for 2 more days while Carver recovered his strength. The townspeople, once they heard what had happened, offered food, supplies, and a room at the boarding house. Lily stayed close to her father. But every evening, she'd find Jacob and sit with him on the porch, watching the sunset over the valley. "Are you really leaving?" she asked on the second night. Jacob nodded. "Your papa's strong enough now. You'll be all right. But where will you go?" "Don't know yet," Lily frowned. "That sounds lonely." "Maybe," Jacob admitted, "but it's what I know. Doesn't mean it's what you need." Jacob looked down at her. She was so small, but there was a wisdom in her eyes that didn't belong to a child. She'd seen too much, lost too much, and somehow she'd held on. "You sound like your papa," Jacob said. "He says you're a good man." "He's wrong." "No," Lily said firmly. "He's not." Jacob didn't argue. He just looked out at the horizon, where the last light was fading into purple and gold. "If you ever need help," Lily said quietly, "you can come find us. We'll be there." Jacob's throat tightened. "I know." He left at dawn the next morning. Carver was standing outside the boarding house, leaning on a cane but upright. Lily stood beside him, her hand in his. Jacob swung into the saddle and looked down at them. "You take care of her." "I will," Carver said. "And thank you for everything." Jacob nodded. "You got a second chance, don't waste it." "I won't." Lily stepped forward, her eyes shining. "Will you come back?" Jacob paused, his hand on the reins. He wanted to say yes, wanted to promise her something solid, something real, but he'd made too many promises in his life that he couldn't keep. "Maybe," he said finally. "Someday." Lily smiled, small and hopeful, and that was enough. Jacob turned his horse and rode out of town, the morning sun at his back and the road stretching endlessly ahead. Epilogue. 6 months later, Jacob found himself riding through familiar territory. He hadn't meant to come back, hadn't planned it. But the road had a way of leading a man where he needed to go, whether he knew it or not. The cabin sat at the base of the hill, just as he remembered, but it looked different now. The roof had been patched, the door hung straight, and smoke rose from the chimney, steady and sure. Jacob dismounted and walked toward the door. It opened before he could knock. Lily stood there, taller than he remembered, her hair braided neatly, her face bright with surprise. "Jacob!" She threw her arms around him, and he froze for a moment before slowly, carefully, hugging her back. "Didn't think I'd see you again," she said, pulling back and grinning up at him. "Didn't think I'd come back," Jacob admitted. Carver appeared in the doorway behind her, looking healthier, stronger. "Jacob Cole, thought you were a ghost." "Not yet," Jacob said. Carver smiled and stepped aside. "Come in. We just sat down to supper." Jacob hesitated, his hand on the doorframe. For so long he'd been a man who kept moving, who never stayed, who never let himself belong anywhere. But standing there, looking at Lily's hopeful face and Carver's outstretched hand, he realized something. He was tired of running. "All right," Jacob said quietly, "just for tonight." But as he stepped inside and the door closed behind him, as Lily laughed and Carver poured coffee and the fire crackled warm in the hearth, Jacob knew the truth. He wasn't leaving. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Maybe not ever. Because somewhere along the way, between the promise and the gunfight, between the darkness and the dawn, he'd found something he thought he'd lost forever, a reason to stay. And for the first time in 10 years, Jacob Cole, drifter, gunman, loner, felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. He felt like he was home,